What's up guys, Brady Figel here, coming at you with a review of the new Alter Bridge album, Alter Bridge, released last Friday, January 9th. I'm trying this new review style. I'm standing up, I can move around a little bit, I can be more animated. I thought what could be a better way to start out my first review of 2026, and I plan on uploading a lot more reviews in 2026. So if this video interests you, if music content interests you, I highly encourage you to subscribe. I would appreciate that a lot. Now, on the topic of Alter Bridge, they're literally my favorite band. I've listened to Alter Bridge pretty much my entire life. I consider myself an expert on their catalog. But that being said, I'll be the first to admit, I was a little nervous going into this record. For one, just the fact that it's a self-titled and it's following up their previous record, Pawns and Kings, from 2022. The band, to me, had somewhat of a creative ceiling that they would have to burst through in order to really hit home with this record. Pawns and Kings, to me, had shown some of the band's most bold and brave experimentation of their career up to that point. That's the reason why I loved that record so much. They made songs like Sin After Sin, Holiday, Fable of the Silent Sun, and Last Man Standing completely stand out in their catalog as a whole. Not to mention that that album was just a really solid, a really tight 10 tracks that, to me, didn't have an ounce of filler on it. And there was also the matter of the Creed reunion. This is the first we're hearing from Alter Bridge since Creed has gotten back together. And the guys in the band have just been so freaking busy. I have no idea how they were able to find the time to still record a new Alter Bridge album and release it fairly on time. Not just that, but the singles that were released for the record, at least for the most part, they didn't sound like anything super new or fresh to me at the time. I listened to them and I enjoy all of them for the record. And I figured that in the full album context, the songs would just make a bit more sense. That usually is how Alter Bridge records work for me. And for the most part, that is what happened. The singles did really all grow on me in the full album context. Like with the opener and lead single Silent Divide, it's in the full album context that you can appreciate more of the subtleties, like the fact that Miles is kind of doing some different styles of singing, especially in the verses of the songs. He takes on more of like a lurking, almost ominous type delivery, which I've never heard him do before. I thought it was a creative choice for the chorus of the song to kind of melodically descend the way it does. The bridge section, especially that solo part, is awesome. Not just the solo itself, but you got that snarling riff playing underneath it that really adds to it. The second single, What Lies, is a track that I was fairly lukewarm on when it dropped because, let's face it, that intro part is painfully familiar if you're a hardcore Alter Bridge fan. I'll elaborate more on that later, but this is another song that really grew on me. I think the chorus, how it takes on more of a darker feel to it, is really effective. That main riff actually coming back at the end of the song is a lot more effective, I would say, than the intro. There's also some more cool lead guitar sections in the song. These are the two singles that, to me, benefit the most from the full album, the rest of the album, giving it some context. Overall, this album does take on more of a familiar approach than both Pawns and Kings and Walk the Sky prior. There's less experimentation on this record, I would argue. But here's the thing, this is Alter Bridge we're talking about. These guys are like my favorite band, so I'm fine with that. Some notable examples of this, the song Tested and Able has a signature Alter Bridge style of mood shift that would have fit pretty snugly on AB3. Just the way that chunky riff starts the song, but then the rest of the song is fairly melodic, and that chorus in particular just has some really endearing and pleasant melodies. There's the track Disregarded, which is a highlight for me, which just has that slimy, slithering main riff that I think is fucking sick. But the chorus has more of like a lively, full, energetic type feel. This track to me felt like a logical successor to Indoctrination off of Walk the Sky. What Are You Waiting For is a song that, again, feels familiar, but in a very welcome type of way. This is another song that reminds me a lot of AB3. The track Power Down has a main riff that feels like it was ripped right off of Tremonti's A Dying Machine record. It's nice to see Alter Bridge kind of with this album creating definitely somewhat of an amalgamation of multiple of their different sounds that they've had throughout their career. And I'll say it right here, this is a really, really great album. I love this album already. But I do have my criticisms that prevent this from being what I would call a masterpiece, as I have said about past Alter Bridge records. And because I'm such a big fan of them, because I know their music so well, you'll notice that my criticisms are going to be very picky, very nitpicky, and very specific. But oftentimes there were things that I just heard in certain songs that bothered me in a way that once I heard them, I couldn't unhear them. I think we've all had somewhat of an experience like that with a song, even if we end up liking it. On the drumming front, I love Flip's drumming, don't get me wrong. He's one of my favorite drummers, period. There were certain moments where it felt like there was a few drum beats, or maybe even at times one drum beat, just missing from a riff that I think would have really driven the riff home further. Like there's that chunky bridge riff that comes in the bridge of the song Rue the Day, which sounds great. It's heavy, it's chuggy, it has a lot of energy to it and a degree of meanness, which I always like to hear in Alter Bridge's music. But the drums underneath, notice how they don't perfectly follow the rhythm going on in that riff. Flip on this song, on that part, leaves a bass drum beat out of it. And I'm not quite sure why. The same thing happens on the main riff of the track Tested and Able, which riff-wise is a similar idea, just being kind of just chug focused. But it's the same thing. He leaves one bass drum beat out of that part so it doesn't perfectly line up with the rhythm going on in the guitar. I don't quite get that. To me, it dials down the energy and it feels a little bit like there's something missing from it. And going back to what Lies Within earlier, I think maybe the biggest reason why that intro sounds so derivative is because how many times have we heard Flip use that exact same mid-tempo triplet groove as he does in that part? So those are both small things that detracted a little bit from the overall listening experience. But I will attempt to kind of balance that point out with some praise for some of Flip's moments on here. Scales Are Falling, for instance, is a track that has some odd time ideas, and I think Flip plays pretty much the perfect groove that could be played behind that part. And maybe my favorite song drum-wise on here is Disregarded. His groove switch in the second verse there, I think, is a highlight drum-wise on the album. And then in that bridge section, when you get that stomping, pounding snare drum really driving the song, it adds a lot to the energy and the intensity that, especially that ripping solo, complements. My next minor picky criticism is lyric-wise. There's a few moments on here where I feel like certain lines feel recycled, feel like I've heard them before. How many times now have we heard Miles say he should have known it from the start? It appears twice on this record in very prominent ways. But once again, on the flip side of that, there's some real lyrical highlights on this record. For one, the third-person lyrics on both Rue the Day and Scales Are Falling was a welcome return to some of those lyric ideas we heard on AB3, like on a track Fallout, which is written entirely in third person. The epic closer, Slave to Master, has some really great lyric ideas that touch on kind of someone trying to leave an abusive relationship, which is obviously something really difficult, and I think Miles' lyrics on this song really do reflect that well. Also, the ballad on this record, Hang by a Thread, does a great job of distinguishing itself lyrically from all the other Alter Bridge ballads of the past. It's not warm and endearing like Watch Over You. It's not grieving like In Loving Memory is. It's not triumphant like All Ends Well. It's much more of a darker lyrical theme, but the despair rings through the song brilliantly, and not just lyrically, but the instruments as well, and a lot of the melodies in that track complement that really well too. On the vocal front, I have zero criticism. Like, the balance on this record between Miles and Mark, I think, is great. One thing I was worried about is that the band would get a little too predictable as far as having one song on every record where Mark takes the lead vocals. I like that they kind of mixed things up a little bit, where he did some verses, he did some choruses, and there's also moments where his background vocals are elevated in the mix enough to where he's really doing more of co-leads on a lot of parts on here. And of course, Miles' vocals are phenomenal. I especially love how on this record, he seemed like he wasn't trying as much to sing in the higher register. There's a lot more of his middle to low register on this album, and I really like hearing that. Again, it kind of takes me back to AB3 a little bit. And I think maybe my last criticism about the record is that I would like to see Alter Bridge kind of step outside their comfort zone a little bit more, because structurally in particular, the songs don't really take any risks. They all follow the same typical pop song structure, which is intro, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus. Every song on here does that. And at times, to me, it makes the album feel a little bit restricted and bound. I feel like if Alter Bridge were to have maybe left out a few choruses or traded some of these choruses for added bridge sections, it would have really spiced things up on this record and made for a more dynamic and unpredictable listen. Because once you get past the first half and you're listening to these songs, it's very obvious that that chorus you've already heard 2 times is going to come back at the end of the song, I should say. Why not experiment a little bit more? Go for more of a proggy vibe, which at times this album glimpses at, but it's not quite explored enough to me. And a lot of it is due to, again, these very rigid song structures. One thing I was also maybe worried a little bit about as far as the band getting too predictable is, again, the epic closer, Slave to Master. This idea of Alter Bridge trying to outdo themselves every record by saying, this is our longest song, it's on this record. I really hope that doesn't become a theme with every album. That being said, Slave to Master is awesome. It's one of the best songs on here. And despite it being over 9 minutes long, you really hardly notice how long it is. Even despite that almost 2-minute guitar solo, which might be the high point of the whole album. And seriously, not just this song. Lead guitar-wise, this record is out of this world. This is probably the biggest and the most noticeable step up in quality more than anything else on this record. These solos account for some of the most memorable and climactic parts of all of these songs. Slave to Master is the most obvious one, of course, but Disregarded, when you get that mean guitar riff creeping in and that, again, pounding, cracking snare drum, and then just that blistering lead section kicks in, that is one of the high points of the record as well. Once again, Silent Divide. I love that solo, and I love the riff being played underneath it. Another big highlight for me on this record is the track Scales Are Falling, because of just the emotion that comes in the bridge of that song. It hits you right here, as Alter Bridge excels at doing. But a big part of that bridge hitting as hard as it does is that lead section that comes in. And although I don't find this album to be quite as bold or experimental as Pawns and Kings, or maybe even Walk the Sky even at times, it still has its moments for sure. Like that main riff on Rue the Day, completely unique in the Alter Bridge catalog. I just love that snarl it has to it, and it again brings in that element of dissonance. What Are You Waiting For is a track that I already highlighted the riffing on, but lyrically too, it takes on more of like a confrontational type of point of view, which I think is rather unique for them. Maybe the best balance between familiar and explorative is the ballad On Your Hang by a Thread, because once again, lyrically, it takes on kind of a new narrative bend for the band, but sonically, it really does bring back the sound of Blackbird or AB3 just in the clean guitar tone and the way it rings. And I especially love how, very much in a similar way as Watch Over You does, the song really does a great job at crescendoing and getting more and more powerful as it progresses. And of course, Slave to Master, the 2-minute guitar solo, again, probably the high point of the entire record. This is probably the moment more so than any other that feels like the band put no restrictions on themselves. They just let themselves go and go until they feel like they've had enough to say. Also the intro, how it kind of has like this synthetic a cappella type vibe to it.
Though this truth is hard to take, we're stepping back, we've lost.
It reminded me a little bit of All the Wicked Things, which was the intro, or the closer on Tremonti's And Will Show Us How record that came out last year, that I also did a review of. Also, Scales Are Falling sounds rather unique in the Alter Bridge catalog too. There's still some new ideas in this album. It's just that there's noticeably less, in my opinion, than there was on Pawns and Kings, and they're just not as bold. They're not as brave, I don't think. This is a much safer album to my ears. Once again, still love it. The fact that this album dropped as early as it did in the year make this like an easy album of the year contender for me, because I'm going to have the whole year with it. Overall, like, it's very difficult for this band to put out something that I just straight up don't like. As expected, I love this album. That's why my criticisms of it were so small, but that does prevent this album from getting a perfect score, which if you watch my Alter Bridge discography ranking that I uploaded last week, you'll be able to see where this album fits in to their discography for me. I'm going to score this album a 27 out of 30. As always, thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Remember to hit the subscribe button once again for more rock and metal-related and music-related content. I would love to hear all your guys' thoughts on this record below. Is there something that I didn't touch on? Do you think I'm wrong about something? Please let me know in the comments so we can continue to talk about this amazing band. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Peace.